an enormous scale, I think there is a sort of, I can imagine there's a difficult side and also a really sort of rich opportunity side to working in that kind of environment. And I'm thinking through the lens of design thinking and customer centricity and all that good stuff. On the one hand, I think it must be very, very difficult to really empathize and get in touch with your customers and understand, or your learners, to understand how to make your product better. On the flip side, I'm thinking it must be really relatively easy to run experiments, rapid experiments, and test and see what behavior change they drive. How do you go about understanding and learning from your customers?
So I guess the way to think about it is multiple different data points or perspectives on the same truth. So really deeply, nobody really knows. We've got that many customers going through it that it's impossible to make a single statement about people want this, they don't want this, they like that. You might be able to say Spanish men in the late teens and early 20s strongly prefer one feature, but when you're generalizing up to the entire nation and the entire world, it's very difficult to have absolute truths about anything. So we embrace that ambiguity and we have multiple touch points. So sometimes we do sort of kind of qualitative research. So you might be using the app and a pop-up message appears inviting you to talk to us about how you're finding it. And if you say yes, you'll do a live video chat while using the app that we can talk to you and we can show you some new features and you can talk to one of our researchers and click things. And we find that massively useful. So we're just getting touch points with people around the world. Excuse me. Touch points with people around the world, and they're giving us insights. And even though those are just micro stories from single people, those feel really real. We also obviously just analyze data continually. So we see how people use things. We run A/B tests. We run different versions for different geographies or different segments of users to try and give us some insights. So we use multiple different ways of collecting data, sort of quantitative data, qualitative data, trying to stitch those together. We also let users vote on new features. So if we have a sort of website that we run that users, if they want features, they can propose them and vote on each other's. So we get sort of dynamic feedback from people who want to give us the time to recommend things. And so then part of the art is to stitch all these insights together and decide what we build next.
I mean, you have worked, one of the reasons I was interested in having you on the podcast, except for this sort of fascinating day job that you've got now, is that you've had a little foot in the sort of corporate learning world as well. How hard is learning a language compared to the kind of typical workplace learning that people do? It strikes me as a very sort of high order learning activity. And as such, we might be able to learn a lot more about learning if we follow the people who are going through this exercise.
Fantastic question. So I guess, of course, learning a language is hard, right? I mean, everybody has a different goal with language. If it's ordering a drink in a bar, or if it's having a detailed philosophical discussion, there's the sort of order of magnitude, different length of time it takes you to get there from zero. But learning a language it's a behavior. It's partly about the skills you're building, and it's partly about actually the behavior of learning a language and falling in love with that process itself. Maybe it's similar in the work-based learning context. It's maybe worth thinking of some of those behavior things. So if I'm running a training course in being a better manager, and actually the purpose of the training is to give me a bunch of information and it finishes. So it's one day or it's over 1 week and it finishes, and 3 months later I'm as bad a manager as I was when I started. That's more just information giving. It's not really training. You haven't helped those managers change their behavior. I think if you really want to make impact, it's sort of an L&D side. You start moving into the behavior change. How can I affect change in the organization rather than just how can I deliver the information my learners need? And when you start thinking of L&D like that, then there's fairly good correlation with language learning, because it's about persistence and really trying again and again and again. And obviously we're mostly in the B2C world. So we do sell quite successfully Babbel into corporates, but our primary focus is these millions of individual people who opting in and paying their own money to learn a language. And that only works if they stick with it. So it's in everybody's interest. It's in their interest and in our interest that they maintain a habit of learning and that their learning progresses. And that's a long-term view. That's not a short-term view. It's not a course and you're done. It's a stick with this and try and improve yourself over 3 months, over 6 months kind of commitment. And I think if there's topics that L&D pick up that are that kind of length and where you're using the tech to drive engagement and the tech to hook people in, I think there's a huge amount to learn.
It's super fascinating. And I think that when I think about how tech has impacted certainly workplace learning, in phase one, it was all very operational. It was how do we enroll people in programs, and how do we connect people through communications programs, and how do we serve up content and search for it. It's all very, very sort of tactical. It seems to me that we're now at a place where we're really starting to apply technology to people's behavior and to the sort of process of learning. And that starts, I think, with an acknowledgement that it's hard to learn. So I guess this leads me to ask you about something that we might call attention economics. That phrase is getting a lot of attention, no pun intended. A sort of management of information that treats human attention as a scarce commodity and applies these sort of theories of how to motivate people and challenge people to grab their attention. I know in our pre-call, you and I talked a lot about the importance of motivation and commitment and the hard work of supporting the hard work of learners. Is that where a lot of your time and experiments are focused?
Yes, totally. And I think the whole attention economy area is a critical one. It's also a loaded word, right? It's got negative connotations. It's all my apps on my phone competing for my time and competing to distract me and sucking me into holes of following Instagram things or getting lost in some Twitter conversation when I'm not really wanting to do that, right? So it's got that negative connotation.
Yes, or worse, getting me to vote for somebody that I have no intention of voting for, or there are even more draconian examples, right?
Totally. So I mentioned earlier that we took quite a conscious decision not to look for revenue by placing ads, but rather by asking people to commit up front to their learning and to pay something. And that's got a bit of a reference with the attention economy, because we want to make sure that the time you're spending, we're doing what we believe is best for your learning rather than for keeping you in the app. But there are positive sides. We were talking about the behavioral economics, the nudging, and we're very keen on that. We're very keen on trying to understand what our role is as providing this tech to help you build the learning habit you wanted, because you signed up wanting a learning habit. So there is a bit of an opt-in piece of it. And there's a whole set of theories, which we've discussed on the pre-call, right? So there's a whole behavioral economics side, kind of nudge theory, Taylor. There's various ideas about engagement loops and hooking you in, the sort of addiction type stuff. Nir Eyal's book Hooked is one of the classics on that. But on various sort of ways of building habits. BJ Fogg has a whole lot of kind of thoughts about tiny habits and how those operate. So there's a whole series of different sciences here which are about nudging and guiding and trying to encourage behaviors. The key thing here is we want to do the behaviors for good, right? We're trying to help you achieve your learning aim that you wanted in the first place, rather than distract you. If anything, we maybe compete slightly with some of the other distractions, trying to make learning the language at least close to as engaging as what your aunt had for dinner.
Yes, and I think a good example. But I think there's something, particularly learning and the process of learning, there's really a strong trust element that needs to be there. And I could see how it might be easy to turn people off if you're sort of too heavy-handed with these techniques.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've got it right. I mean, I hope we do. We have several sort of big competitors in the marketplace. A couple of whom are freemium products and who invested a lot of time in getting you to come back, nudging, messaging you, kind of stalking you to come back again. And we started off on the other end of the spectrum where we thought, actually, no, we don't want to stalk anybody. We just quietly wait here for them when they come back again. And then realized a year or so ago that we were really missing an opportunity because our learners did want to learn. That's why they were there, and they got distracted. So we're trying at the moment to understand what's the right amount of nudging and calling you back, and at what point is it too much. We probably start from the more German perspective, which is respecting your absolute privacy, not knocking on your door too much. And whereas a lot of the app economy starts from a much more US centric perspective, which is continually banging on your door, even if you don't want to be banging on the door anymore. And so we try to find that balance somewhere in the middle.
Perhaps that's another good reason for being in Berlin. Perhaps Berlin is the right balance of those approaches.
Yeah, maybe.
When I go on your website and I engage in your programs, I see some currently what I call sort of fashionable approaches or techniques that I know people are experimenting with. For example, I see spaced learning. I see a degree of personalization and personalized learning. The experience starts with a sort of an assessment, which is quite an interesting thing to go through. And I also see you experimenting with collaborative learning. So not learning being not just a solitary thing, but it looks like you're doing some work around learning in groups. Can you walk me through what you've learned about the efficacy of these approaches? Are there particular strategies that have really impressed you or likewise underwhelmed you? What are the sort of things that you're enjoying seeing play out?
Well, it's a fascinating area, this that we operate in, right? Because if you look in the learning technology sphere, you get one set of theories and approaches. If you look at the straight kind of app economy and app engagement economy, there's a different set of theories and approaches. And what we play with is a combination of both of those. But in both spaces, it's a real mix of some real science, some absolute mumbo jumbo hype nonsense that's got a good narrative and everyone gets excited about, and various things in between. And we try and kind of look honestly at all of those things and pull a mix together that works best. So like you mentioned, the spaced repetition. If somebody comes to you all excited about the fact they've got this amazing spaced repetition thing, it's helpful to remember it's been around for over 100 years as a concept. and it's, it is good. It's quite useful. It's a useful way of helping you memorize and focus the time you spend. But it's not the only way. You can't only learn with that. That's just about reminding you about facts that you've seen before. And it's often slightly overstated. The hype around it is slightly overstated. But we definitely use that as part of our approach. Where you see that most is people who are learning with flashcards, vocab learning games, or any kind of flashcard repeating facts type game.
Good technique for sort of cramming lots of factual information.
And based on some reasonably solid base ideas, which is just about helping you repeat something often enough that you remember it, and finding a smart methodology for when to repeat it, when you need to next visit it. So it's not, it's a good, that's a good thing. It definitely works. You mentioned the collaboration. Certainly in language learning, working with peers is a massive motivator. Working with other people. I mean, language is about speaking to other people. So we probably don't do enough of it in our product at the moment. We're aspiring to do more. As you rightly pointed out, we're running a few different sort of side initiatives of pairing people up for video chats and finding ways of building more of that. But that human aspect works really well. The personalization is a great area because it's a simple word, and there's 50 different groups of people that think they're doing very diverse things all in that area. For us, I guess the personalization, you meant the self-assessment, key underneath all of these is helping you find what you need and helping you feel that you're making progress and helping you with your motivation. So if we can find one magic formula that we can answer the same thing to everybody, we would give everybody the same thing. Reality is humans are complex and different, and they start at different levels, and they all want to learn different things. And so the personalization is actually just a natural follow-on from that. It's what do we need to do to help as many people as possible feel that they're getting the thing that they need, even though it might not be that many other people who want the same thing. And we do that with, as you pointed out, the sort of assessments to help figure out your level, and we ask you questions as you go through about why you're learning, and then we try and recommend things that are most suited to what you want. And I think any any sort of reasonable digital product